Hello, this is Dr. Neil Boumpani. Welcome to my channel, yourchildseducation.com, saving your child from the failed American public school system. Today we're going to look at how to get past woke teachers, and this is for students who have woke teachers and do not feel comfortable about what they're hearing. Before that, I would like to review my common reminder to ask people not to partake in condemnation before investigation. So many people will not listen to somebody if they think it's coming from, quote unquote, the other side. Or they hear something and their ideology, their groupthink makes them shut it out and sometimes, talk over the person. We need to learn to listen if we're going to get along in this country, and we're not. We're being pulled apart by extremists, and we need to work on this. So anyway, I hope you'll give me the chance to share my ideas with you. So let's get right to it. There are young people who do not accept the woke agenda. These young people often face condescending teachers and professors who make the unwoke students targets of scorn and ridicule. I have seen it. Even when I was working on my PhD in the late 1990s and early 2000s, I had a professor who was hostile to me because of my beliefs. The result was one of my only 2 grades of C in my doctoral studies. So I understand that questioning the woke educator can have its downside. Therefore, in this video, I'll talk about how to handle the woke teachers without getting yourself in trouble. First, please understand that many people who are falling on the woke bandwagon do so because they have been constantly exposed to woke educators, woke news, woke TV and movies, and even woke churches. They might have parents who would rather vote for Satan if he ran for office rather than a member of the other party. Maybe you've experienced the scorn of a woke teacher, or maybe you simply fear that scorn. Even young people can recognize the insanity of the woke policies that are dividing America by class, race, gender, age, faith, etc. So if you are in school facing the insanity of wokeness, let's see what you can do to fight back without fighting. Okay, first, to validate my claim that I've been through this, I'll tell you of my own experience with a professor from the far left. Please keep in mind that this was over 20 years ago, so wokeness has been coming for quite a while. Anyway, as part of my doctoral studies, I was required to take a philosophy course. Now, philosophy can be defined as the study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence, especially in academic disciplines. The book for the course, which I will not name, was extremely biased against people of faith, and the author misused scripture to try to discredit the God of the Bible, which I will explain. Now, in the beginning of the course, I can honestly say the professor liked me. I always did the assigned reading. I came to class prepared. For the first half of the semester, I answered more questions than any other student in class. Most students weren't doing the reading. I made sure never to openly question the professor regarding the bias of his text. At the time, besides working in the public school system and working on my doctorate, I was also directing the Duke University marching and pep bands. Now, Duke was playing a mid-season basketball game at the Greensboro Coliseum, and I was there directing the pep band. Just so happened that my philosophy professor was at the game, saw me direct the band, even watched me play the drums on my arrangement of Sing, Sing, Sing. Now, during our next class, he even made mention of this in class, crediting me with creativity. I was a legitimate teacher's pet. Then came the midterm philosophy paper. In the beginning of the semester, the professor stressed that although Eastern philosophies were closely tied to religious beliefs, in the enlightened Western countries, philosophy and religion were divorced from each other. Now, I never accepted this, but again, I never openly questioned the professor in class. I make no apology that I am a Christian. So on my midterm paper, I explained how I could not divorce my faith from my philosophical beliefs. Now, I thought if I explained myself well, that the professor would accept my paper. Well, my beliefs regarding knowledge, existence, and reality are strongly tied to my faith. This did not mean that I believed women should be kept in the kitchen barefoot and pregnant, or that homosexuals should be jailed. It only meant that I could not hold any philosophical position that would compromise my faith, especially as it concerned my students. I was determined to do my best to serve my students, base decisions on loving my neighbor as myself. I treated people fairly, tried not to judge others, and helped whenever it was in my power and in the best interest of another person. So in my paper, I decided to address the problems I had with the text and the anti-Judeo-Christian bias it held. I would have no problem had the book, not use scripture out of context to prove a point. And, the left loves to take scripture out of context to demean those who believe. As I wrote, I pointed out several examples within the text. For the sake of brevity, I'm only going to discuss one here. So here it is. In the book of Genesis, chapter 22, there's an account of God asking Abraham to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. If you know the story, follow along with me. If not, well, Isaac was the promised son born to Abraham and his wife Sarah when both were around 100 years old. God had promised Abraham that his descendants would multiply like the stars in the heavens. So having faith that God would honor his promises, when God told Abraham to sacrifice his only son, Abraham got up, set out on the long journey, taking 3 servants and his son Isaac. Well, Isaac was puzzled that his father brought no animal to sacrifice. When he asked his father about it, Abraham only answered God would provide. Now, this is the point in the story where the author of my philosophy text stops and asks the question, what kind of God asked the father to kill his only son? That was it. Now, since the great majority of people are either biblically illiterate or take no interest in the Bible or what they might see as the Old Testament, so many might agree that this story at the least raises questions about the validity of the God of the Bible. But some of us know the rest of the story, that this was merely a test of Abraham's faith. Whether you believe it's a story or it's true, it doesn't matter. Let's go by what it's written. As Scripture goes on, Abraham was right to the point of plunging his knife into his son when God spoke and stopped Abraham. God credited Abraham's faith in him and then provided a ram for the sacrifice. Now, what many do not know, according to many theologians, centuries later on that very spot, God would allow his only son to be sacrificed, right on that same spot, which would become part of the city of Jerusalem. In my paper, I used this and other examples from the text to simply point out that the author was somewhat biased. From that point on, the professor never again called on me in class, wouldn't even make eye contact with me. And again, at the end of the semester, C. Well, whether I deserved it or not, I'm not going to complain about it. Okay, at the same time, and I'm only going to mention this, I was frustrated by another professor, not because of any left-wing bias. This one professor was on my dissertation committee and gave me a hard time simply because this professor's narrow life experiences would not allow for my more practical approaches to problems in music education. This professor had earned her bachelor's and master's in music, then taught for 3 years as an assistant in a very nice band program in the Midwest. Right after that, she went and got her PhD and then went on to teach college, where she was teaching other potential teachers how to teach. This is the case for many in education in all academic areas. Their life experiences are very narrow. I worked in the city schools where I had sometimes no budgets, but I don't want to go into a long story here. Anyway, my frustration with having to deal with professors like this led me to call my undergraduate mentor and friend for advice. Tony always had practical solutions to problems and always had time to offer his students advice. What he told me, I'm going to pass on to you. He told me, jump through the hoops that are set before you by cheerfully doing whatever they ask. Give them the answers they seek, even if you think the answers are BS. Pass your exams, get your degree, then do whatever the hell you want. Now, this was not easy for me to do, as I've always thought of myself as a person who stands on principles. But after I realized that I might be confusing principles with pride, it made sense. I did not need to agree with what I was being asked. I only needed to give them the answers they sought, pass the exam, get my degree. So if you're in school and don't agree with your woke teachers or professors, make sure to avoid confrontation. If you're a quiet person, then just take the test, give the teacher the answers they want, pass your test, then quickly forget what you were told. Move on. If you have to write a paper Write it so they will accept it, even if you have to write something totally contrary to what you think. Of course, you should never write a paper that is against your faith. At times, you might believe that something should be said. Make sure you're ready for the fallout. Make sure that you learn how to carefully phrase questions. Let's say you're not a shy person, you want to talk. Make sure you learn how to carefully phrase questions so you do not put the teacher on the defensive. You never want to let the teacher know that you do not accept wokeness. Always have facts to support your questions. When you raise your questions in a non-threatening manner, as if you were simply asking for clarification, you might not get the lashback. Make sure you do not make an adversary of the teacher, because woke teachers have no problem with using grades as a weapon. Sometimes your questions may be brushed aside or labeled as right-wing propaganda that you should not listen to. But don't allow that to deter you. See, raising the questions may plant a few seeds in the minds of other students. Avoid follow-up questions if the teacher seems to be getting agitated. If that happens, always smile and apologize by explaining that it was not your goal to upset anyone. You were just trying to get clarification. And if you bring up facts, make sure you have sources for those facts. For example, if you have statistics, teachers hate it when someone challenges them with statistics, especially when those statistics come from the government. Never state anything that you read or heard on social media unless it can be backed up elsewhere. Avoid arguing, especially from an ideological point of view. Never allow your face to show any signs of emotion that might give you away. You're going to become an actor, okay? Let's use an example. Let's say the woke teacher talking about a right-leaning speaker that's coming to campus, and the woke teacher addresses the class. It is obvious that Mr. Right-Wing over here is highly racist and should not be allowed to speak on our campus. And your question, if you want to raise a question, might be, first of all, you're going to butter her up. Yeah, I said that exact same thing to one of my friends, and he asked me to explain how I know the speaker is racist. I could not answer, so what should I say? Now, in that way, you've raised the question without challenging the teacher. All right, let's have another example. Let's say you're in elementary education methods class, and this subject comes up. The woke teacher says, if a 6th grade student claims to be of a different gender, the parent should not be able to stop that child from getting puberty-blocking drugs. Now, you may know something, and you might ask this question. I heard that Sweden banned those drugs on children under 18. Have any studies been conducted that suggest the drugs might not have negative side effects? I just want to make sure. And this woke teacher may come back at you to put you on the defensive. What are you saying? That people should be allowed to be transphobic? Well, then answer, no, not at all. I accidentally came across this story as I was researching drug interactions for my mom. It made me wonder, which is why I asked. So at this point, you haven't received an answer. You probably won't, but don't push for it. Your point has been made. Other people have heard an alternate view, and you haven't made an enemy. Be careful, though. Don't do this too often. And make sure you agree enough so that these questions, when they do come up, don't label you as an agitator. I'm also going to ask my readers and listeners if they're educators and they have any ideas, any examples they could give me. They could comment below, comment on my website, actually, which is best. Maybe I can publish a list of examples that students can use to avoid confrontation with woke teachers. Now, whatever you do, remember that you're asking questions, never trying to attack the position of the woke professor or teacher. Do not be surprised if you rarely get answers. Keep in mind, you're asking the questions mainly to get others to think. This also means you might not be able to let your friends in on what you're doing, because there's always a blabbermouth. You'll never change the position of the woke teacher or professor. Don't think that you can. Again, for review, when you have to give an answer on a test, give the teacher the expected answers, then remind yourself to forget it. Get your diploma, degree, and then you could fight for what's right in whatever way you wish. Run for school board, public office, let your voice be heard. But remember, always have your facts and sources whenever you have to make a point. Oh, here's a quick point. Even after your schooling, you might find yourself working under the authority of some diehard woke person. the things I've talked about today will help you. But you should have options if you have a degree. You don't have to work for somebody that's like that. Okay, about my site, just to give you a few other thoughts here. My site is going to try to expose the true intent of the people who want to bring America under Marxist control. Their goal is, as it has been for evil people for thousands of years, is to have a one-world government. In another blog or video, I'll explain this in more detail. In the meantime, I suggest you read a book written in the 1970s entitled None Dare Call It Conspiracy by the author Gary Allen. He was a self-proclaimed liberal who set out to show how right-wing conspiracy theorists were wrong. What he uncovered was actually shocking. Of course, the book's been out for years. A lot of us have read it. A lot of people haven't. They buy the media's hype on things, a conspiracy. You know, if you look it up, how many quote-unquote conspiracy theories have proved out to be correct, you might think twice. I highly suggest that book. Well, thank you. I hope you like this. If you did, please consider subscribing, ring the bell, put a like up. I do appreciate it. And please visit my website at www.yourchildseducation.com. My website is not set up for commerce at this point, so don't worry about being on a client list. I would really love to have some feedback from other educators. I urge people to get their children out of the public schools as soon as possible. However, it pains me to think of all the parents who either can't afford that or don't have the time because they're single parents or both parents work hard. So maybe other educators could help me to help them come up with ways to combat the poison that their children are being fed through wokeness. The hate that is arising in people because of all this is not going to help. It's driving our country further apart, and that may be exactly what some of our leaders want. In the meantime, like I said, please consider helping out with your advice and thoughts. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.